My son always considered my birthdays a boring chore. His wife's parties, her parents' birthdays, vacations with her family, he always found time for those. For me, it was just a routine call. But when I was going through old albums and posted a photo of a dilapidated lake house online with the caption, "Soon returning to my childhood home," he rushed to my 60th birthday party with a huge bouquet. He saw that realtors had valued the wreck and the land beneath it at 7 zeros. He didn't come to celebrate. He came to make sure his name was in the will for the house. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. Let's be honest, turning 60 is a milestone, but not always the kind you celebrate with confetti and champagne. For me, it was shaping up to be more of a quiet cup of tea and a slice of supermarket cake kind of day. That was the tradition my son, Mark, and I had fallen into. Not that I didn't want more. Lord knows I did. But after a while, you learn to stop wanting things that only lead to disappointment. You just adjust. For the better part of a decade, ever since Mark married Tiffany, I had become an obligation, a box to be ticked on a long to-do list. Mother's Day, a floral delivery from a 1-800 number and a text message. Happy Mother's Day, hope you love the flowers. Tiff and I are so swamped, but we're thinking of you. Christmas, a couple of hours in the late afternoon after they'd already spent the morning with her parents, the fun ones, opening presents and drinking mimosas. They'd arrive at my little condo with that pre-packaged glazed ham look on their faces, full, tired, and ready to leave. My birthday, which falls inconveniently in early March, was always the worst. It's a nothing time of year. Too late for winter coziness, too early for spring blossoms. It's just gray. And for years, that's what my birthdays had become. A perfunctory 5-minute phone call from Mark, usually on speakerphone from his car, the sounds of the road and Tiffany's faint chatter in the background telling me everything I needed to know. "Hey, Mom, happy birthday!" He'd chirp, his voice a little too loud, a little too forced. 60, wow, big one. We should do something soon, maybe dinner next week. Tiff sends her love. Soon never came. Next week would turn into, this month is just crazy, which would melt into seasons. I knew the dance. Tiffany's calendar was a fortress, guarded by Pilates classes, brunch dates, and endless obligations to her own family. Her mother, Carol, was practically a third person in their marriage. Her mother's birthday was a weekend trip to a spa in Sonoma. Her mother's dog's birthday warranted a catered barbecue. Me? I was the Tuesday afternoon dental appointment you keep rescheduling. This year, for the Big 6-0, I told myself I wouldn't even expect the call. I'd preemptively cut the cord of hope, let it go to voicemail, and save myself the ache. My friend, Brenda, was going to take me to the new Italian place downtown, the one with the good Chianti, and that would be enough. More than enough, really. A good friend who shows up is worth 100 relatives who don't. A week before the day, I was doing a bit of pre-spring cleaning, you know how it is. Mostly junk, old tax returns, warranties for appliances I no longer owned. But then I found it, a heavy, faux leather photo album from the 70s. The kind with the sticky plastic pages that have yellowed over time. On the cover, in peeling gold letters, it said, "Summers at the Lake." A wave of nostalgia hit me so hard, I had to sit down on the floor. I peeled back the crackling plastic, and there it was, my childhood. Photos of me with pigtails and a missing front tooth, holding up a string of sunfish. My father, young and impossibly handsome in his swim trunks, proudly standing by the rickety wooden dock he built himself. And pictures of the house, the Lakehouse. It was my father's pride and joy. Not because it was fancy, it was the opposite of fancy. It was a glorified shack, cobbled together with more love than skill, on a piece of land on Heron Lake that my grandfather had bought for a song back in the 40s. It was 2 hours north of the city, a world away. We'd spend every summer there. The place smelled of pine needles, damp towels, and my mother's fried chicken. It was where I learned to swim, to fish, to be.
After my parents passed, the lake house became mine. By then, it was already starting to crumble. The porch was sagging, the roof leaked, and the dock had been half swallowed by the lake. When I married Mark's father, he had no interest in it. A money pit, he'd called it. After we divorced and I was raising Mark on my own, I couldn't afford the upkeep, let alone the taxes. I thought about selling it 100 times. I even got it appraised once, back in the late 90s. The realtor had practically laughed. The structure was a liability, and the land itself wasn't worth much back then. It was too remote, no easy highway access. So it just sat there. For 30 years, it just sat there, visited only by raccoons and the occasional squatter. A forgotten monument to a happier time. I paid the small property tax bill every year, and that was that. I flipped through the photos, my fingers tracing the smiling faces of people long gone. There was one picture of the house from a distance, taken from a boat on the lake. It looked so peaceful, nestled in the trees, even in its state of charming disrepair. On a whim, I snapped a picture of that old photo with my phone. The colors were faded, sepia-toned with age. It looked rustic, artistic even. And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me because you'll want to see how this plays out. That night, I was scrolling through Facebook, looking at pictures of Brenda's new grandbaby, Tiffany's curated gallery of her fabulous life, photos of food at restaurants I could never afford. Everyone's life looked so perfect, so shiny, and I felt a little pang of something. Not jealousy exactly, more like invisibility. Like I was a ghost haunting the edges of my own family. And then I had an idea. It wasn't a fully formed plan, not yet. It was more like a mischievous little spark. I opened my photos, looked at the picture of the lake house, and I thought, what the heck? I posted it. My first post in months. And I wrote a caption, feeling a bit nostalgic today. Going through old albums and found this gem, so many happy memories, soon returning to my childhood home to make some new ones. It felt a little defiant. It was a half-truth, a wistful fantasy. I had no real plans to return. What would I do? Camp on a rotting porch? But it sounded good. It sounded like I had a life, a future, something beyond my beige condo and my quiet routine. I added a little smiling emoji, hit post, and thought nothing more of it. I went to bed and dreamed of pine needles and sunfish. I didn't know I had just lit a fuse. The first hint that something was amiss came from my cousin Sheila, who lives in the county where the Lakehouse is. Sheila is the family genealogist and resident busybody, so of course she's friends with everyone on the county zoning board. She called me the next morning, her voice crackling with excitement. "Clara, what on earth is going on up at the old place?" "I was just looking at old pictures, Sheila." "Pictures? Honey, people are talking. Bob from the planning office said there was an inquiry on the parcel number, and Marianne, you know her, she's in real estate. She said there's been a surge of interest in Heron Lake. Apparently, some tech billionaire bought the old Henderson property on the North Shore and is building some kind of glass palace. The whole area is about to be the next it spot for the super rich from the city. They're calling it the Silicon Riviera. Your little plot? It's not remote anymore, honey. It's lakefront real estate with pristine, undeveloped shoreline." My head was spinning. Silicon Riviera? My dad's leaky shack? I hung up and immediately went to Zillow. My hands were shaking a little as I typed in the address. The site didn't have a value for the house itself. It correctly listed it as a probable teardown. But the land? The little Zestimate box for the land was a number that looked like a typo. It had 7 zeros. 7. I stared at it for the full 5 minutes. I refreshed the page. The number was still there. That piece of dirt, that tangled mess of weeds and pine trees where I caught frogs as a little girl, was worth millions. It wasn't a money pit. It was a gold mine. I felt a wave of dizziness, followed by a laugh. A loud, hysterical laugh that was part joy, part disbelief, and part something darker. I spent the next 2 days in a daze, fielding calls from realtors who had somehow gotten my number. They used words like unprecedented opportunity and bidding war. One guy promised he could get me 8 figures. 8. I told them all I wasn't interested in selling, that it had sentimental value, which only seemed to make them more frantic. But I didn't hear a peep from Mark. I knew he'd seen the Facebook post. Tiffany's name was on the list of people who had liked it. I could just imagine the scene. Tiffany scrolling through her feed, seeing my post and snickering. Oh, look, your mom's getting sentimental in her old age. Returning home to that dump? Mark would have just grunted, not really paying attention. It was my fantasy, my private little memory, and to them, it meant nothing. It was just another sad post from the old lady. Then came my birthday. I was getting ready to go out with Brenda, putting on a little mascara, feeling pretty good about 60. The 7 zeros hadn't quite sunk in, but they'd put a little spring in my step. I had a secret, a big one. My doorbell rang at 6 o'clock sharp. Brenda was always punctual. I opened the door with a smile on my face. But it wasn't Brenda. It was Mark. Standing there on my welcome mat in a suit, looking nervous. And in his hands was the biggest bouquet of lilies and roses I had ever seen. The kind of ostentatious display they sell in hospital gift shops for 5 times what they're worth. "Happy birthday, Mom," he said, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. For a second, I was just stunned. He was here. He hadn't just called from the car. He had come here, dressed up, with flowers. A pang of something warm and hopeful fluttered in my chest before I could crush it. Maybe I had been too cynical. Maybe turning 60 really did mean something. "Mark," I said, genuinely speechless. What are you doing here?" "What do you mean? It's your 60th birthday," he said, stepping inside as if he'd been invited. He looked around my small living room, his eyes scanning everything. "You didn't think I'd miss it, did you?" "Oh, I knew you'd miss it, honey. I had a 59-year track record to prove it. And Tiff, she feels just awful she couldn't make it. Her dad, he tweaked his back playing golf and Carol needed her. Family emergency." Of course, an emergency involving the sainted in-laws. At least they were getting creative with their excuses. "That's, thoughtful of you to come all this way," I said, carefully. I watched him. He wasn't relaxed. He was coiled like a spring, his eyes darting around. He wasn't here for me. He was here for something else. He was a salesman on a cold call trying to act casual. He was about to make his pitch, and suddenly I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, what this was about. He hadn't seen a sentimental Facebook post about my childhood house. He had seen a $sign, a great big $70 with a lake view. He didn't come to celebrate his mother. He came to check on his inheritance. He followed my gaze to the ridiculous floral arrangement that was now squatting on my coffee table, taking up all the available space. "Is it too much?" he asked, misreading my expression completely. "Tiffany ordered it. She has a go big or go home philosophy." I just smiled. A thin, tight smile I had perfected over the years. The kind of smile you give when the cashier is rude or when someone cuts you off in traffic. It says everything and nothing at all. "It's lovely, Mark. Thank you." I walked back toward the kitchen. "Can I get you something? I was about to open a bottle of wine to have with Brenda, but she can wait. It's not every day my son pays me a surprise visit." The sarcasm was so light, so feathered, it flew right over his head. No wine for me, thanks, Mom. I have to drive. Just some water would be great." He followed me into my small galley kitchen, and I could feel him looming behind me as I got a glass from the cupboard. My kitchen suddenly felt claustrophobic. His presence so large and so rare, seemed to suck all the air out of the room. He leaned against the counter, trying for a casual pose that didn't suit him. His suit was expensive, charcoal gray, the kind he wore to close deals. I wondered if he considered this a business meeting. "So," he began, tapping a manicured finger on my Formica countertop. "Big news." I busied myself with the faucet, running the water until it was cold. "What news is that?" I asked, keeping my back to him. "Well, you know, the Post, the old Lakehouse." He chuckled, a dry, airy sound, with no humor in it. "That really brought back memories. Me, you, Dad, catching all those fish."
A lie. His father hated the lake house, and Mark, after the age of 7, had always found it boring. He'd complained endlessly about the mosquitoes, the lack of television, the rustic, well, everything. But I just handed him the glass of water and leaned against the opposite counter, folding my arms. "They were good times," I said. "Yeah, they were," he said, taking a sip of water. His eyes were doing that thing again, scanning the room as if he were assessing it for value. "So, you're really thinking of going back? I mean, it's been a while. The place must be a wreck." "It probably is," I said, shrugging. "It's the land I remember most. The trees, the sound of the water at night. It's so peaceful." "Peaceful, right," he said, nodding a little too vigorously. "Peaceful is good. But you know, Mom, a place like that, there are liabilities. Squatters, taxes, insurance, especially with all the development happening up there now. It's crazy what some of those properties are going for." And there it was, the opening gambit. He said it so casually, as if he were discussing the weather, but the word properties hung in the air between us, glittering and sharp. "Oh," I said, feigning ignorance. I hadn't really heard. I don't keep up with that area much anymore. "You wouldn't believe it. The CEO from some tech company just bought the old Miller farm for $12 million. Can you believe that? The Miller farm. That place was just a pile of mud and rocks." He took another nervous sip of water. "Someone mentioned to me that your piece of land, our piece of land, is one of the last undeveloped, privately owned waterfront lots on the entire lake. Our piece of land." The slip was so natural, so telling. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach, but on my face, I kept the placid, slightly vague smile. "Oh, is that so? Well, I suppose that's nice," I said airily. It was always a special place. I decided to change the subject, to play the role he had cast me in, the sentimental, clueless old mother. "Do you remember that tire swing your grandfather hung from the big oak tree? You adored that thing. You'd swing so high I thought you'd fly right into the lake." He looked momentarily thrown off balance. Yeah, Mom, yeah, I remember." But his mind wasn't on tire swings. He set his glass down with a decisive click. "Look, the reason I came, besides your birthday, of course, Tiffany and I were talking." "Ah, the royal we. Tiffany and I, the board of directors has met and reached a decision," he said, sounding like he was reading from a script. "We think it's great that you're re-engaging with that part of your life, but an asset like that, you should have a plan. We should have a plan. You know, for insurance purposes, for the estate. We should probably get it formally appraised. I know a guy, a good commercial guy, not one of these small-town hacks. He could give us a real number." The sheer audacity of it stole my breath. Here he was in my home for the first time in a year, turning my birthday into a financial planning session for his own benefit. He was talking about the estate as if I were already in my coffin. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. The loving son, so concerned for his mother's well-being, so eager to help her manage her asset. I could see Tiffany in every word, every carefully chosen phrase. This had her fingerprints all over it.
She was the one who read articles about wealth management and flipping real estate. Mark didn't have the finesse for this. His approach was all brute force. "Mark, honey," I said, my voice soft and syrupy, "that's all business talk. It's my birthday. Let's not be morbid." "It's not morbid, Mom. It's responsible," he insisted, his voice rising a little. "A property worth, well, potentially a lot of money, you can't just let it sit there. It needs to be managed, protected, for the family's future." His phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it, and for a split second, I saw the screen. It was a text from Tiffany. The letters were big and sharp. "Did you ask about the will?" My blood ran cold. It was so much more blatant than I had imagined. They had coordinated this. She was outside in a car somewhere, directing this entire performance. I felt a surge of something hot and powerful. Rage. Not the loud, screaming kind, but the quiet, icy, hot kind that settles deep in your bones and solidifies into resolve. They hadn't just misjudged my sentimentality, they had fundamentally misjudged me.
For all the years he had treated me like a fragile, simple-minded relic, he had forgotten where he got his brains. His father was a sweet, gentle man, but he wasn't a planner. I was the one who managed the money, who navigated the divorce, who figured out how to stretch a single salary to raise a son and keep a roof over our heads. I was the one who negotiated the loan for his first car and helped him with the down payment on his first apartment, the one he shared with Tiffany before they got married, and my help was no longer needed. They thought I was a doddering old fool looking at faded photographs. They had no idea I was the one who could play chess. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing my son's face. The little boy who used to bury his face in my skirt when he was scared was gone. In his place was a greedy, entitled man being puppeted by his equally greedy wife. And in that moment, the last vestiges of hurt and disappointment fell away, replaced by a crystalline, chilling clarity. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a hostile takeover attempt, and I would not be taken. "You know, you're right, Mark," I said, and his face brightened with relief. "It's irresponsible of me to not have a solid plan. I'm turning 60. It's time I thought about these things. Legacy, family." I let the words hang in the air, let him savor the taste of his victory. He thought he'd won. He thought he had nudged the old lady in the right direction and the gold mine was secure. His shoulders relaxed. He even managed a genuine-looking smile. "I'm so glad to hear you say that, Mom. I was worried you'd be emotional about it." "Oh, I am emotional," I said, patting his arm. "I'm emotional about family, about making sure things are taken care of the right way." I leaned in a little closer, as if sharing a secret. "And don't you or Tiffany worry your pretty little heads about it. I have a plan. I've already made some calls." His face was a storm of confusion and alarm. This was not part of their script. I was supposed to be helpless. I was supposed to need his help, his commercial guy, his guidance. The idea that I was moving on my own, without him, was clearly a terrifying thought. The fear in his eyes was naked, fear of being cut out. The doorbell rang again. This time, I knew it was Brenda. "That's my guest," I said brightly, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "It was so good of you to come, sweetheart. You have no idea how much this visit has meant to me. It's really clarified things." I walked him to the door. He was sputtering, trying to regain control of a conversation that had completely slipped from his grasp. "But Mom, who did you talk to? We should coordinate. You shouldn't sign anything without letting me see it first." I opened the door, and there was Brenda, holding a bottle of Chianti and a small box wrapped in birthday paper. Her warm, genuine smile was a stark contrast to the panic on Mark's face. "Clara, happy birthday," she chirped, giving me a hug. She looked past me and saw Mark. "Oh, Mark, what a nice surprise to see you here." "Brenda," he said, his voice strained, "just dropping in to wish Mom a happy birthday. I was just leaving." "So soon?" Brenda asked. "He has to get back," I said, patting Mark's shoulder one last time. It felt like I was touching a statue. "Family emergency." Tiff's dad tweaked his back. I ushered him out and stood at the door as he practically ran to his polished black SUV parked at the curb. I saw the passenger side dome light flick on. He was reporting back to his commander. Brenda came and stood next to me. "Everything okay, hun? He looks like he's seen a ghost." I closed the door. A real, genuine smile finally reached my own eyes. I turned to my friend, who had never missed a single birthday. "Everything is fantastic, Bren," I said, taking the bottle of wine from her. "In fact, I think this is going to be the best birthday I've ever had." Brenda closed the door behind me and guided me into the living room, taking in the absurdly large vase of flowers that now occupied my coffee table like an invading species. "Good heavens, Clara, did a florist truck explode in here?" I let out a real laugh, the first one that evening that wasn't coated in irony. "That's Tiffany's handiwork, apparently. A go big or go home gesture."
"Well, she certainly went big," Brenda said, uncorking the Chianti with an expert twist. "So, are you going to tell me why your son, who hasn't been here for your birthday since forever, showed up looking like he was about to face a firing squad?" We settled onto the couch, and as I sipped the rich, dark wine, I told her everything. The Facebook post, the phone call from my cousin Sheila, the staggering member on Zillow, and the details of the visit that had just concluded. I even told her about the text message I saw on Mark's phone. "Did you ask about the will?" Brenda, who is normally the most mild-mannered woman I know, actually growled, a low, guttural sound in the back of her throat. That little, "Oh, I'd like to give that Tiffany a piece of my mind. And Mark, honestly, Clara, to be so transparently greedy. And it tweaked back, please. That's the oldest excuse in the book." "The worst part, Bren," I confessed, swirling the wine in my glass, "isn't even the greed. It's the insult to my intelligence. Did they really think I was that foolish? That I wouldn't put two and two together? For years, they have treated me like this sweet, slightly dotty old woman who was happy with a phone call and a grocery store card. They built this whole narrative around me, and they were furious when I didn't stick to their script." "So, what's your next move?" she asked, her eyes sharp and focused. "He's going to be back, and he'll bring the queen bee with him next time. They smell money, and they're not going to give up easily." "I know," I said, taking another sip of wine. It was fortifying. When I told him I had already made some calls, I was just bluffing, trying to get him out of my house. But lying on the floor is not a plan. He came here to check on his inheritance. Well, I think it's about time I gave him an inheritance to worry about. A slow, wicked grin spread across Brenda's face. "Now you're talking. What are you thinking? Cut him out completely? Leave it all to a cap shelter?" I thought about it for a moment. The angry, hurt part of me screamed, "Yes! Let them have nothing! Let them see what it feels like!" But the other part of me, the part that had raised a little boy and remembered his soft hair and the way he used to grip my finger, felt a pang of sadness. Vengeance was easy, but justice was more complicated and far more satisfying. "No," I said finally. "That's what they expect. A big, dramatic, emotional gesture. They'd fight it in court, claim I was senile, that you or someone else had undue influence over me. No, my plan has to be smarter than that. It has to be airtight. It has to be permanent." I didn't just want to win a battle. I wanted to end the war. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. The next morning, after Brenda left, my head was surprisingly clear. The rage had cooled and settled into something solid. Purpose.
I spent the entire day online, but I wasn't looking at real estate listings or vacation spots. I was researching. I typed in phrases like estate planning for large assets, creating a charitable trust, and ironclad wills. I read about probate, trusts, foundations, and tax implications until my eyes blurred. For years, my biggest financial decision was whether to switch from my regular cable package to a cheaper streaming service. Now I was wading through the complex architecture of serious wealth. It was exhilarating. Mark and Tiffany thought of me as technologically illiterate. I wasn't. I was just uninterested. But when I had a reason, I could learn anything. I had taught myself how to do my own taxes online, how to navigate the Medicare Part D website. Believe me, if you can figure that out, you can figure anything out. My research led me to one inescapable conclusion. I needed a shark. Not just any local lawyer who draws up simple wills, but a specialist in high net worth estate law. I needed someone who could build a fortress around my assets, someone who had seen every trick and every loophole that greedy relatives try to exploit. I found her on the website of a major downtown law firm. Her name was Evelyn Reed. Her biography was intimidating. Top of her class at a fancy law school, a string of awards, and a specialty in complex family asset protection and philanthropic planning. She looked to be in her late 40s, with a sharp, no-nonsense haircut and eyes that seemed to see right through the screen. She was exactly what I was looking for.
I almost lost my nerve. A woman like that was probably used to dealing with tech billionaires, not retired administrative assistants from the suburbs. Her hourly rate was probably more than my monthly Social Security check. But then I looked at the 7 zeros on the Zillow page again and thought, I can afford her. The thought sent a jolt of power through me. I took a deep breath and filled out the online contact form, giving a brief, sanitized version of my situation. Recently discovered significant value in a long-held family property and wish to discuss estate planning. It sounded so professional. An hour later, I got a phone call. It wasn't from a secretary. It was from Evelyn Reed herself. Mrs. Peterson? Evelyn Reed, I received your inquiry. Your situation sounds intriguing. I have an opening in my schedule tomorrow morning at 10. Would that work for you? Her voice was crisp and businesslike, but not unkind. Yes, that would be perfect, I managed to say, my heart thumping. Excellent. See you then. She hung up. It was happening. I had a meeting with a shark. Of course, the universe wasn't gonna let me have a full 24 hours of peace. That evening, my phone rang. The caller ID said Tiffany. My stomach tightened. The queen bee was making her move. I let it ring 4 times, took a deep, calming breath, and answered on the 5th. Hello? I said, my voice deliberately placid. Clara, hi! I am so incredibly sorry we missed your big day. Her voice was a cascade of sugar and honey, so sweet it could give you a toothache. I hope Mark explained. My dad, the poor dear, his back just went into spasm. It was a whole drama. He explained, I said. I hope your father is feeling better. Oh, he's a trooper. But that's not why I was calling. Mark came home last night and he seemed a little rattled. He mentioned you were talking about making plans for the Lakehouse and that you'd spoken to some people? The question was posed as a light, casual inquiry, but I could hear the steel underneath it. This was an interrogation disguised as a friendly chat. Just preliminary research, I said vaguely. I'm an old woman, Tiffany. I have to think about these things. Of course, and we are so on board with that, she chirped. In fact, that's why I'm calling. My uncle, Rodney, he's one of the top estate lawyers in the state. He handles all of my father's business. He said he would be more than happy to sit down with you, with all of us, as a favor. No charge, of course, just to make sure you're protected and everything is, in the family.
Bingo! There it was, the countermove. Their lawyer, their expert, the one who would ensure that their interests were protected. Uncle Rodney, the family fixer. The blatant, breathtaking nerve of it was almost impressive. Tiffany, that is such a generous offer, but I wouldn't dream of imposing on your uncle. Besides, I already have an appointment scheduled. There was a half-second of silence on the other end of the line. The temperature of the call dropped by 20 degrees. "An appointment?" she said, her voice suddenly sharp, all the fake honey stripped away. "With who? Clara, you shouldn't be talking to anyone without us. Mark is your only son. You could be taken advantage of. There are people who prey on seniors who come into sudden money." The condescension was so thick I could have sliced it. She wasn't just insulting my intelligence now, she was flat out calling me a doddering, incompetent senior. She was telling me that I, a woman who had managed her own life for 60 years, was too stupid to talk to a lawyer on my own? I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white, but I kept my voice as calm as a summer morning. "Thank you for your concern, dear, but I assure you, I am perfectly capable of handling my own affairs. Now, I have to go. I have a roast in the oven." I didn't. I was about to eat a lean cuisine. "But wait, Clara, who is the appointment with? You need to tell me. Mark has a right to know." "You have a lovely evening, Tiffany." And with immense satisfaction, I pressed the red end call button, cutting her off mid-sentence. I stood there in the quiet of my living room, the phone in my hand, my heart hammering against my ribs, not with fear, but with exhilaration. The chessboard was set. They had made their move, trying to insert their queen's bishop into my back rank, and I had blocked it without even blinking. Tomorrow I would meet my shark, and we were going to plan a checkmate they would never see coming. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm. For the first time in a long time, it wasn't anxiety that woke me, but a thrumming, nervous energy. I chose my outfit carefully. I wanted to look respectable, but not like I was trying too hard. I settled on a pair of simple black trousers, a silk shell blouse in a nice navy blue, and my one good blazer. I even wore my pearl earrings, the ones my father had given my mother for their 25th anniversary. I needed to feel grounded, solid, like I belonged in the places where big decisions were made. The law firm of Reed, Gable, and Associates was on the 40th floor of a glass and steel skyscraper downtown. The lobby alone was enough to intimidate you, all gleaming marble and hushed, important-sounding echoes. When the elevator doors opened onto the 40th floor, I stepped into a reception area that looked more like an art gallery. Tasteful modern art on the walls, orchids that were clearly real, and a stunning view of the city unfolding below. For a moment, I felt a flutter of insecurity. What was I, Clara Peterson from the suburbs, doing here? But then I remembered Tiffany's condescending voice on the phone. "There are people who prey on seniors who come into sudden money," and my spine stiffened. I was not a victim. I was a client. I walked to the reception desk with a confidence I didn't entirely feel. A young man with impossibly perfect hair looked up. "Can I help you?" "I have a 10 o'clock appointment with Evelyn Reed. My name is Clara Peterson." "Of course, Mrs. Peterson. Ms. Reed is expecting you." I was led down a quiet, carpeted hall to a corner office with a view that was even more spectacular. And there, sitting behind a large, uncluttered mahogany desk, was Evelyn Reed. In person, she was even more formidable than her photo. She stood up as I entered, a gesture of respect that I appreciated. She was tall, poised, and radiated an aura of sharp, focused intelligence. There was not an ounce of fluff about her. "Mrs. Peterson, it's a pleasure to meet you," she said, shaking my hand. Her grip was firm. "Please, have a seat. Can I get you some coffee? Water?" "Water would be lovely, thank you." As she poured me a glass from a sleek silver carafe, I took in her office. It was like her, organized, impressive, and without a single wasted detail. Bookshelves lined one wall, but they weren't for show. They were filled with thick legal tomes, many of them flagged with colored tabs. She sat down, folded her hands on her desk, and fixed me with a direct gaze. "So," she said, getting right to it, "you have a lake house." And so I told her. I told her everything, starting with my father building the shack with his own 2 hands, the 30 years of it sitting dormant, and the quiet, lonely birthdays. I told her about Mark and Tiffany, the shift in their relationship, the neglect. I told her about the Facebook post, the Zillow estimate, the surprise birthday visit, the absurd bouquet of flowers. I even told her about the text message I'd glimpsed on his phone, the one about the will. When I got to Tiffany's phone call and her generous offer to have Uncle Rodney handle everything, Evelyn's impassive face finally cracked into a tiny, humorless smile. "Ah, Uncle Rodney," she said, as if she were meeting an old and predictable foe. I finished my story, feeling drained, but also lighter. I had laid all the ugly, painful pieces out on her desk, and she hadn't flinched. She'd just listened, her intelligent eyes never leaving my face, occasionally making a small note on a legal pad. When I was done, she was silent for a full minute, tapping a pen against her pad. "Well, Clara, may I call you Clara?" I nodded. "Your son and daughter-in-law are textbook. This is a classic sudden asset scenario. They are attempting to secure their perceived interest in an estate that is not yet an estate. Their tactics are ham-fisted, but the underlying strategy is common. They are trying to isolate you, control your access to professional advice, and position themselves as your loving, concerned protectors, all while making a grab for the cash." Hearing her lay it out so clinically was validating. I wasn't being overly sensitive or paranoid. This was a pattern, a game, and she knew the rules. "So, what are my options?" I asked. "Broadly speaking, you have several," she said, leaning forward. "You can sell the property, pay the capital gains tax, and manage the proceeds. You can put it in a standard revocable trust, naming your son as the beneficiary, which is likely what he's expecting. You can, of course, disinherit him entirely. That would almost certainly lead to a protracted and ugly legal battle, which he would probably lose, but it would drain years of your life and a good portion of the assets in legal fees." She paused. "Or we can do something more creative. Something that honors the legacy of your parents and the land itself. Something that puts you and you alone in the driver's seat. Something that is so legally airtight, so thoroughly buttoned up, that Uncle Rodney wouldn't be able to find a loose thread with a microscope." My heart started to beat a little faster. Tell me more about creative. And then Evelyn laid out a plan so deliciously clever, so perfectly tailored to their specific brand of greed, that I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. Stick with me, because the trap was about to be set. We are going to set up a charitable foundation, the Heron Lake Preservation Foundation. Its stated mission will be to preserve the natural beauty and ecological health of the Heron Lake watershed. We'll draft a mission statement that would make John Muir weep. We will fund it with the land. The property itself will be transferred into the foundation's name. My mind was reeling. A foundation? It sounded so grand, so complicated. But I wouldn't have the money then. "Oh, you'll have the money," she said with another one of those thin, sharp smiles. "Because you, Clara Peterson, will be the president and chairman of this foundation, and the bylaws of which we will draft will stipulate that the chairman is entitled to a generous annual salary for her services. A very generous salary. Let's say, for argument's sake,
a percentage of the foundation's total asset value. It's completely legal and standard practice for a private family foundation. You'll have more money than you'll know what to do with, all paid to you as income to spend, save, or invest as you see fit. I was stunned into silence. It was brilliant. I wouldn't just be a rich old lady. I'd be a philanthropist, a respected community figure, the president of something important. But what about Mark? I asked, my voice a whisper. Yes, Mark, she said, her eyes glinting. We can't just cut him out. That's too emotional. We have to be surgical. The bylaws of the foundation will include a single, perpetual board seat reserved for your direct descendant, your son. Upon your death, he will have the option to take over as chairman. If, she raised a one finger, he meets certain qualifications. What qualifications? First, he must have served as a non-salaried, volunteer vice chair for a period of no less than 5 years prior to your passing, to show his dedication to the mission of the foundation, of course. She said, the sarcasm subtle but biting. During those 5 years, he must attend a minimum of 75% of the quarterly board meetings. He would also need to dedicate a verifiable 100 hours per year of volunteer service to ecological causes. And just to make it interesting, we'll put in a morality clause. If he is ever found to be acting in a way that is contrary to the Foundation's mission of conservation, say, for instance, investing in companies with poor environmental records, or trying to illegally pressure the board to sell the land to developers, he can be removed by a unanimous vote of the other board members. It was a beautiful, perfect trap. A trap baited with everything Mark and Tiffany wanted, control of the money, but with a lock that could only be opened with the one key they didn't possess: genuine, selfless effort. 5 years of volunteer work, attending boring quarterly meetings for no pay, 100 hours a year mucking out a stream bed or planting trees. There was a better chance of Tiffany giving up designer handbags. They wanted the prize without the work, the inheritance without the relationship. Evelyn's plan would force them to either change who they were or forfeit everything. And I knew which one they would choose. And who are the other board members? I asked.
That's the beauty of it, Evelyn said. We appoint them. A local biology professor from the community college, the head of the county historical society, respected, unimpeachable people who actually care about conservation, people who won't be swayed or bullied by a slick guy in a suit. Their vote, along with yours, will control everything. I sat back in the soft leather chair, my mind spinning with the sheer glorious elegance of it all. It was more than a legal strategy. It was a work of art. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of justice, poetry, and a little bit of mischief. I would get to spend the rest of my years running a foundation dedicated to the place my father loved most. I would be comfortable, secure, and have a purpose. Mark would be given a choice, a clear path to follow if he truly cared. And if he didn't, well, that would be his decision, not mine. The future of my father's land would be protected forever. Evelyn, I said, my voice thick with emotion. It's perfect. I thought you might like it, she said, allowing herself a brief, genuine smile. The first step is to get the land officially appraised and transferred into your name solely and securely, cleaning up the title. Then we file the paperwork for the 501c3 foundation. It's a mountain of paperwork, but that's what I'm here for. Your only job for now is not to speak to your son, his wife, or Uncle Rodney about any of this. If they contact you, you are polite, you are vague, and you tell them your advisors are handling everything and you can't discuss the details. Let them sweat. I left her office feeling 10 feet tall. I walked out of that gleaming skyscraper not as a dotty old woman, but as Clara Peterson, founder and president of the Heron Lake Preservation Foundation. The sun seemed brighter, the city noise less jarring. I had a shark on my side, and we were about to go hunting. As if on cue, my phone buzzed in my purse as I waited for the crosswalk. It was a text from Mark. "Mom, we need to talk. Tiff and I are really worried. You're not answering our calls. Please call me back. We just want to help." I looked at the text, at the fake concern and the manufactured panic. A week ago, it would have twisted my stomach in knots. Now, I just smiled. I typed back a simple, breezy response. "Everything is fine, dear. So busy with my new project. My advisors are keeping me on my toes. Talk soon." I sent the message and turned my phone on silent, slipping it back into my purse. Let them worry. Let them wonder. They had no idea what was coming. The game had just begun. The weeks that followed were a study in contrasts. My life, which had been a placid and somewhat lonely pond, was now a bubbling spring of activity. Evelyn Reed's office would email me documents to review, drafts of the foundation's charter, mission statements, board member prospectuses. I went to the library and checked out books on nonprofit management and local ecology. I, Clara Peterson, who used to spend my afternoons watching game shows, was now reading about shoreline erosion and the migratory patterns of the common loon. I felt alive. I had a project. I had a purpose. Meanwhile, on Mark and Tiffany's end, there was a rising tide of panic. My new strategy of polite, breezy deflection was driving them insane. They were used to either being ignored or being the center of my universe. This new middle ground, this cheerful, busy, inaccessible mother who had advisors, was completely outside their experience. The texts became more frequent, the voicemails more demanding. "Mom, it's been 2 weeks. What advisors? Who are these people? You have to tell me." "Clara, this is Tiffany. Mark is very upset. We feel like you're shutting us out. This is a family matter. It shouldn't be handled by strangers." "Mom, pick up the phone. I'm starting to think someone is taking advantage of you. Are you okay? Do I need to come over there?" This last one was a threat disguised as concern, and it was a promise he kept. One Saturday afternoon, just as I was settling in with a book about grant writing, my doorbell rang with a series of sharp, impatient jabs. I knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. There they stood, the united front of Mark and Tiffany. No flowers this time. Tiffany's arms were crossed over her chest, her perfectly lipsticked mouth set in a hard line. Mark just looked stressed, his brow furrowed, his expensive weekend polo shirt already looking wrinkled. They had come for a confrontation. I opened the door, a placid smile on my face. "Mark, Tiffany, what a surprise!"
"We were in the neighborhood," Tiffany lied, pushing past me into the living room. Mark followed, looking sheepish but determined. "Mom, we're not leaving until you tell us what's going on," he said, his voice strained. "We've been calling, you're being evasive. Who are these advisors? Did you hire a lawyer? Why?" Tiffany immediately started prowling the small room, her eyes darting everywhere as if looking for clues. "Did one of those real estate people get to you? Did you sign something, Clara? You know you shouldn't sign anything without talking to family first." The condescension, the complete dismissal of my autonomy was breathtaking.
I felt the old anger prickle my skin, but I pushed it down, remembering Evelyn's words: polite, vague, and let them sweat. I sat down in my favorite armchair, folding my hands in my lap. I was the picture of calm. "There's no need for all this excitement," I said gently. "I'm simply getting my affairs in order. It's the responsible thing to do." "Getting your affairs in order is something we do together," Mark insisted, standing over me. "I'm your son. I have a right to know what's happening with the Lakehouse, with our family's property." "It's my property, Mark," I said, my voice still soft but with a new edge of steel. "And I am handling it in the way I see fit. My advisors and I have a comprehensive plan that we're very excited about." "What plan?" Tiffany demanded, whirling around. "A plan to what? Sell it out from under us? You know what that land is worth." "Of course I do. That's why I'm taking such care to make sure it's managed properly, to create a lasting legacy. Now, if you'll excuse me, I was in the middle of some research for my project." The two of them just stared at me, dumbfounded. They had come expecting to find a scared, confused, old woman they could bully into submission. Instead, they found a calm, confident stranger who spoke in business platitudes and refused to be rattled. My refusal to fight, to get emotional, to give them anything to latch onto was disarming them completely. They thought they could bully me into submission. They forgot I had a shark on my team, and it was time to let her bite. Mark's frustration finally boiled over. "This is ridiculous. I am not leaving until I see some paperwork. Who is this lawyer, Mom?" "I'm afraid I can't discuss the details of my legal arrangements. Client confidentiality, you know." He looked like he was going to explode. He ran a hand through his hair, his face turning a blotchy red. But Tiffany shifted her tactics. She came and knelt beside my chair, putting her perfectly manicured hand on my arm. Her face was a mask of concern. "Clara," she said, her voice dripping with faux sympathy, "we're just worried. You've been alone for a long time. It's easy to be charmed by fast-talking professionals who promise you the world. They see a woman of your age with a valuable asset, and they pounce. We just want to protect you. We love you." The hypocrisy was so stunning, so profoundly insulting, that I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. She loved me. This woman who couldn't be bothered to come to Christmas dinner on time, who orchestrated my son's absence from every single family event for the last decade, she was talking to me about love, about protection. I gently removed her hand from my arm. "Tiffany, dear," I said, my voice as cold and clear as ice water. "I appreciate your concern, but I have been protecting myself for 60 years. I think I've gotten rather good at that." They had no response to that. They stood in my living room, impotent and furious, their carefully planned ambush a complete failure. Finally, defeated, they turned and left, slamming the door behind them. The silence they left behind was wonderful. I picked up my book on grand writing and smiled. Phase 1 was complete. They had officially gone from fake concern to open hostility. It was time for Phase 2. The next week, I took a drive. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I just got in my sensible 4-door sedan, packed a thermos of coffee and a sandwich, and drove 2 hours north to Heron Lake. I hadn't seen the property in person in at least 20 years. As I got closer, I saw the changes my cousin Sheila had talked about. The old 2-lane country road was now a freshly paved highway. Tucked into the woods were signs for new developments with names like Heron Point Estates and The Preserve at Miller's Creek. When I finally turned down the old dirt road that led to our lot, my heart was pounding. It was even more overgrown than I remembered, a tunnel of green. I parked the car and got out. The air smelt different here, clean, alive. It smelled like pine and damp earth and memory.
I pushed my way through the ferns and the underbrush, and then I saw it. The house. Or what was left of it. It was worse than a wreck. The porch had collapsed entirely, and half the roof had caved in, leaving a gaping hole to the sky. It was a skeleton, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. And yet, it was beautiful. I walked past the ruined cottage to the edge of the water. The old dock was gone, only a few mossy pylons sticking out of the water like lonely teeth. But the lake was the same. The water was clear and blue-green, the surface like glass, reflecting the tall pines that crowded the shore. I saw a loon dive, its haunting call echoing across the quiet cove. This was it. This was the legacy. Not a pile of money for my greedy son and his wife to squander on cars and vacations, but this peace, this wild, untouched beauty. My resolve, which had already been steel, hardened into diamond. I was not just punishing their greed, I was doing something good. Something that would have made my father, the man who built a home here with his bare hands, deeply and profoundly proud. 2 weeks later, Evelyn called. "It's done," she said, her voice brisk with satisfaction. The Heron Lake Preservation Foundation is officially a 501c3 nonprofit organization registered with the state and the IRS. The title for the 40-acre parcel has been successfully and irrevocably transferred to the foundation's name. The initial board members have accepted their appointments. You are officially in business, Madam President. I felt a surge of triumph, so powerful it made me dizzy. So what happens now? Now, Evelyn said, a smile in her voice, we send the letter. The letter was a masterpiece of legal formality, printed on heavy cream-colored cardstock with the firm's embossed letterhead. It was addressed to Mr. Mark Peterson. It politely informed him that his mother, Clara Peterson, had recently finalized her long-term estate planning. It announced the formation of the Heron Lake Preservation Foundation and the transference of the property to said foundation. It then, in excruciatingly detailed legal language, laid out the terms of Bylaw 4, Section C, the descendants' seat. It detailed the 5 years of non-salaried service, the quarterly meetings, the 100 annual volunteer hours, the morality clause. It explained that this was his one and only path to a position of leadership within the foundation. It concluded by inviting him to an informational meeting at the offices of Reed, Gable and Associates to discuss his potential future role and the opportunity to begin his volunteer service. It was a bait, a trap, and a final judgment all rolled into one beautiful, legally binding document. Evelyn sent it via bonded courier, requiring a signature upon delivery. That evening, I sat in my living room with a glass of the good Chianti Brenda had brought for my birthday. I knew that somewhere across town, a courier was ringing a doorbell. I knew that a signature was being given. I knew that at that very moment, an envelope was being opened. The fuse that had been lit a month ago was about to reach the dynamite. I took a slow sip of my wine and waited for the explosion. It was going to be glorious. The explosion did not take long. Less than an hour after the courier confirmation pinged in Evelyn's system, my phone rang. The screen flashed with Mark's name, but when I answered, it was Tiffany's voice that came screeching through the speaker, raw and stripped of all its syrupy artifice. "What have you done?" she shrieked, her voice thin and ragged with fury. "What in God's name have you done, Clara?" I held the phone a few inches from my ear, picturing her face, blotchy and contorted with rage. I remained perfectly calm. "Tiffany, I assume you've received the letter?"
The letter? Don't you talk to me about the letter. This is theft. You've been bamboozled by some crooked lawyer into giving away our family's legacy, Mark's inheritance. 7 figures, Clara. Do you have any idea what you've just thrown away? I know exactly what it's worth, I said, my voice even. That's why I took such care to protect it. It was my father's legacy, Tiffany, and now its future is secure. Secure? She let out a laugh that sounded more like a choke. You call this secure? Tying it up in some phony baloney foundation with a bunch of strangers on the board? And this ridiculous list of demands for Mark? 100 hours of volunteer work? Is this some kind of sick joke? It's not a joke. It's an opportunity. One he is free to accept or decline. I could hear Mark in the background, his voice a low, frantic murmur. Give me the phone, Tiff. Let me talk to her. The phone fumbled, and then his voice came on the line, shaking with a potent cocktail of anger and disbelief.
Mom, what is this? Seriously, what have you done? After everything we talked about, I come to you trying to help, and you go behind my back and do this? You've given my inheritance away. The use of my inheritance, again, as if it were a foregone conclusion, a debt I owed him, erased any last flicker of pity I might have felt. I have given nothing away, Mark, I said, standing up and walking to my window, looking out at the quiet suburban street. I have converted a piece of neglected land into a living legacy, and I have provided a path for you to be a part of it. A very clear path. A path? You want me to work for free for 5 years just for the chance to take over? That's not a path, Mom. That's an insult. While you're paying yourself God knows what in salary. My compensation is a matter for the board's foundation, of which you are welcome to become a part. All of your questions can be addressed at the meeting outlined in the letter. My counsel will be there to walk you through the bylaws. I suggest you attend, if you're serious, that is. Oh, we'll be there, he bit out, the words like chips of ice. Don't you worry, we will be there. He hung up without saying goodbye. I disconnected the call and looked at my reflection in the dark window. I didn't look like a vengeful old woman. I just looked calm. I had set the board. Now it was their move. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 4 p.m. When Brenda called to ask how I was, I told her what had happened. She was giddy. Oh, to be a fly on the wall at that meeting, Clara. Do you need me to come with you? For moral support? I can knit in the corner and give Tiffany the evil eye. I laughed and thanked her, but told her this was something I had to do with Evelyn, on my own. When I arrived at the 40th floor offices, Evelyn greeted me in the reception area. Ready for the performance? She asked, with a small, confident smile. As I'll ever be, I said. We went into a large, formal conference room, not her office. A long, polished table reflected the skyline. A pitcher of ice water and glasses were already set up. We sat on one side of the table, my file neatly placed in front of her, and waited. They arrived at 4 o'clock on the dot. They had brought backup. A portly man in a slightly too tight suit waddled in with them, carrying a worn leather briefcase. He had a flushed face and a comb-over that was fighting a losing battle. He had to be Uncle Rodney. Clara, Mark said stiffly, not meeting my eyes. Tiffany stood beside him like a bodyguard, her face set like stone. Mark, Tiffany, thank you for coming, I said politely. This is our attorney, Rodney Tate, he gestured to the man. Evelyn stood up and extended a hand. Evelyn Reed, a pleasure. Uncle Rodney looked at her, at the expensive suit, the powerful office, the air of absolute command, and he visibly shrank.
He was a small-town wills and deeds guy, and he was catastrophically out of his league. He looked like a tugboat that had just been ordered to challenge an aircraft carrier. We all took our seats, my side of the table calm and collected, their side radiating tension like a heat wave. "All right," Mark began, trying to take charge. "We're here. Now, can someone please explain this document and tell us how we undo it?" Evelyn answered before I could. "I'm afraid we are not here to discuss undoing anything, Mr. Peterson. This structure is legal, binding, and irrevocable. We are here, as stated in the letter, to provide you with information on the opportunity available to you as your mother's sole descendant." Tiffany scoffed. "Opportunity? It's a joke. You've tricked my mother-in-law." "I have not been tricked, Tiffany," I interrupted, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through her tirade. It was the first time I'd really spoken. They both looked at me, surprised. This was my idea, my decision, and my wish. Evelyn is here merely to execute my vision for my father's legacy. "Your vision?" Mark sputtered. "Mom, it's a swamp. It was a worthless piece of land for 50 years. Now that it's worth a fortune, you want to turn it into a bird sanctuary?" "Yes," I said simply. "I do." He stared at me, his mouth agape. He genuinely could not compute it. The idea that something could be more important than its cash value was a concept his brain was not equipped to handle. Uncle Rodney cleared his throat, opening his briefcase with a series of loud clicks. "Now, Ms. Reed," he began, trying to sound authoritative, "we believe there are grounds to challenge the precipitous transfer of this asset. Given Mrs. Peterson's age and lack of experience in financial matters, one could argue there has been undue influence."
Evelyn just let him talk, her expression unchanging. When he finally petered out, she leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Tate," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet level, "are you familiar with the precedent set in Franklin v. The Estate of Miller, or the 2018 appellate court ruling on private foundation asset transfers? I assure you, we are on very solid ground here. A competency challenge against a client who is demonstrably lucid and who has undergone 2 separate psychological evaluations as a prerequisite for a transfer of this magnitude would not only fail, it would be viewed by the court as a frivolous and potentially malicious suit. Your client would be liable for all legal fees, both theirs and ours. And I must say," she added, her eyes flicking over to him, "our fees are considerable." Uncle Rodney's face went from flushed to pale. He stammered something about needing to review the file and did not speak again for the rest of the meeting. I then turned to Mark. This was my moment. This was the conversation I needed to have, not for revenge, but for myself. "Mark," I said, and my voice was different now, not angry, just sad. "I would have given you anything. All I ever wanted was my son. I wanted you to call, to visit, to show up for my birthday because you wanted to, not because there was a pot of gold at the end of it. Do you ever stand that? The money was never the point." He shifted in his chair, unable to meet my gaze. He looked at the polished table, at his hands, at Tiffany. "This is your chance. A real chance to connect with a part of your family you never knew. Your grandfather built that house. He loved that land. He worked with his hands. That's what this foundation is about. It's not about you showing up to rubber stamp things and collect a check. It's about you earning your place, showing you care about something more than just the money. 5 years, 100 hours a year, that's all it takes." I let the words sink in. If you want it, the seat is yours. If you don't, the foundation will continue its mission without you. It's your choice. Silence filled the grand room. The only sound was the faint hum of the city 40 floors below.
Tiffany was staring at Mark, her eyes like daggers, telegraphing the answer she wanted. Mark looked lost. For one brief, fleeting second, I saw a flicker of the little boy I remembered, a flicker of conflict. A part of him, a small, buried part, seemed to be wrestling with the idea. But it was only a flicker. He looked at Tiffany, and her hard, imperious glare seemed to solidify his decision. He straightened his shoulders and finally looked at me, his eyes cold and distant. He said, "No, we're not interested in your game. It's all or nothing, and you've made your choice. You chose a swamp over your own family." He stood up. Tiffany and a deeply relieved Uncle Rodney followed suit. "I didn't choose a swamp over my family, Mark," I said to his back as he walked toward the door. "I chose my father's legacy over your greed. There's a difference." He didn't turn around. They walked out of the conference room without another word. The heavy door clicked shut behind them. The sound final and absolute. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. It wasn't a breath of victory. Not really. It was a breath of release. I hadn't lost a son in that room. I had finally and fully accepted that I had lost him a long, long time ago. And it was okay. I was going to be okay. Evelyn reached over and patted my hand. "You were magnificent, Clara," she said softly. I looked at her and smiled, a real, watery smile. "So, what now, Madam President?" 1 year later, on my 61st birthday, I stood on a brand new observation deck built from sustainable, recycled composite wood. It overlooked the quiet cove of Heron Lake. My house, the dilapidated wreck, was gone. In its place was a modest but beautiful field office and educational center for the foundation. We had used a small portion of the capital to build it, and it was a hub of activity. Local school groups came for nature walks. The biology professor from the board ran workshops on water quality testing. It was alive. My generous salary from the foundation was more money than I had ever dreamed of. It had allowed me to sell my cramped condo and buy a lovely little townhouse with a garden. It had paid for a trip to Italy with Brenda, but most importantly, it funded the work. The work gave me purpose. The board members weren't just colleagues, they were my friends, my new family. That morning, my phone had rung. It was Mark. The call was brief, perfunctory. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to say happy birthday." "Thank you, Mark. That's kind of you."
An awkward pause. "So, everything okay?" "Everything is wonderful, honey," I said. And for the first time in years, it was the absolute truth. The foundation is thriving. I'm thriving. "Oh, good. Well, Tiff sends her love. Gotta go." Click. He hadn't been calling for a reconciliation. He'd been calling to check, to see if I'd changed my mind, if the lonely old lady had cracked and was ready to undo the deal. I heard from my cousin Sheila that he and Tiffany had consulted several other lawyers after the meeting, only to be told the same thing. The foundation was an ironclad fortress. Their dream of a 7-figure payback had evaporated, and apparently the bitterness had taken its toll. They weren't happy. It turns out that a life built only on the anticipation of what you will get is an empty house when the inheritance never arrives. Standing there on the deck, watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of orange and purple, I felt a profound sense of peace. They had thought my love was unconditional, but they had learned that love and a last will and testament are two very different things. They had taken my kindness for weakness, my quiet nature for stupidity. They had misjudged me completely. He never came to my birthday parties, and now he never would. Not mine, anyway. He had been invited to a much more important party, one that celebrated legacy and work and beauty, and he had declined the invitation. His loss.
My life wasn't just my own anymore. It belonged to the loons, to the tall pines, to the memory of my father, and to the future of this beautiful, quiet corner of the world. And it was a legacy worth far more than 7 zeros. So that's my story. It's been quite a ride, hasn't it? I'm happier now than I have been in decades. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done in my place?
So another story of my grandmother has end, and be clicking here you will have when more such stories.